video, I'm going to show you how I painted this picture from a photograph. I'm going to talk you through what I did and my process, really. So this is a photograph. It looks quite different from the painting. There's no sky, but I really liked the photograph and I wanted to paint it. So here goes. So I've got my canvas covered board, and I'm quickly drawing in a very rough idea of where the horizon is. And I've got my palette ready with cadmium yellow, ultramarine blue, Prussian blue, titanium white and zinc white. Oh, and I also always like to add in some raw umber, which is a sort of a coolish brown, and I'll explain to you how I use that in a little while. It's a bit of a game changer, I always think. So what I'm going to do now is, let me quickly show you my palette. I use a catering tray, several layers of wet tissue paper and some parchment paper on top, which the water is sort of absorbed by the parchment paper and keeps the paint dry. Keeps the paint dry for a long time because this is acrylic paint, and as you know, it dries pretty quickly. So I'm just mixing up some blue. I've dipped a corner of my big brush into the zinc white and a little bit of titanium white, not really thinking too much about this, as you can see, and a little bit of ultramarine blue. I always find starting a painting a little bit difficult, so I just have to throw myself at it, not think too much about it, and just start to lose myself in the process. So I'm just mixing some on the palette, I'm mixing some on the canvas board, just seeing where it takes me, really. Adding a little bit of water to water it down, just to really get started. You know, I think the thing about a blank canvas is that it can be a bit scary and you don't know where to go with it. So I always think, just get some paint on there and then take it from there. So I've just very, very roughly painted in a very blue sky. I haven't paid too much attention to my horizon line. It doesn't matter that I painted over it. And now I've added a tiny, tiny bit of the raw umber to my blue, and it makes a very lovely grey. I haven't mixed it in terribly well because you get some interesting marks if you don't. And I'm just, as you can see, I've changed from a brush to a kitchen spatula. Actually, it's one of my favourite tools. It's very sort of bendy, and it just works really well. Just fiddling around with this paint now. I'm kind of not really into it, I don't think, at the moment, but that's what happens. Let's just see how this goes. I've mixed quite a darkish grey with the ultramarine, the white and the raw umber, which is a very stormy sky, so that's not worked terribly well, but it doesn't matter because we can paint this out, we can scrape it back. I'm concentrating rather on one little bit of the sky, which is maybe not the best idea, but hey, I'm resorting to a brush to see if I can zhuzh it up a bit. Sometimes skies work really well and other times they just don't, and in this case it hasn't terribly. As you can see, I'm working really quickly. I have speeded this film up but a little bit, but I do still work quite quickly, and the benefit of that is that you don't really think about what you're doing, which is actually quite a good thing. So I've decided I don't really like it, so I'm taking the paint off. I'll keep that bit of paint because I could use it at a different point, and I've pretty much got to a point, I think, where I'm thinking, do you know what, I'm going to leave this because you can just go over stuff and it just doesn't work, and I can come back to that where I'm feeling a bit, I don't know, a little bit more confident, a little bit more relaxed into the painting. So now I'm going to work on the foreground. And the idea of this is to, in this case, is to fill up the space, which sounds a bit boring, but it isn't. It's quite good fun. I'm mixing the several greens actually, with the ultramarine and the cadmium yellow. And I use this spatula again because the pointy end of it makes lovely grassy marks. And I just keep on mixing different greens all the time. And I'm using the spatula in a very, very loose way to simulate the feel of grass, because grass, it isn't always up and down. It's, it moves from side to side. It's different thicknesses. It reflects light. Sometimes it's quite dark in places when it's sort of further beneath the ground and the sun doesn't hit it, and other times it's almost a citrine yellow. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm trying to get both lights and darks into the foreground and the grass. And the idea again is not to lose the individual marks, so I'm being actually quite careful about keeping the marks fairly fresh. I am going over some of them, but I'm just trying to maybe change the angle of the spatula, the thickness of the marks. And at this point, I'm not adding any white, because when you add white to a green, it always becomes a bit pastel-y, and quite often that grass doesn't always look like that. I mean, if it's sort of dying, it looks a bit pastel-y green, but this is a field in spring, if you like, so it's quite vibrant and fresh, and that's what I'm trying to get here. So I'm putting in a mix of Prussian blue and ultramarine blue. I like using Prussian blue in paintings like this because it's not black, but it's a very, very dark, coolish blue, and that means that you can sort of mix it with ultramarine or have it almost saturated by itself, and you can get some good tonal values into your painting. So the Prussian blue is the dark, and then with a little bit of cadmium yellow you can change the colour of the green. So that's all I'm doing now. I'm kind of filling in all those white bits, trying to feel my way around the painting, change the angle that I use the spatula with, and try and get some movement really into the grass. I'm adding some raw umber. Now, raw umber is a wonderful addition to a colour, because when you have lots of saturated colours, sometimes they can get a bit too much, and adding in some raw umber kind of, because brown is made up of the three primaries, it kind of harmonises colours and kind of sits well together. And so if you ever add a brown, in this case raw umber, to any of the saturated colours on your palette and then paint with them, they all become rather beautiful together. Just adding a bit more ultramarine because I've got quite a sort of a gentle turquoise there, which I don't think is quite right. So I'm going back in with some blue and some more yellow, and to get some sort of slightly different coloured grassy colours. Now I'm adding some lights. So I have added a little bit of white, sort of a bluey white actually, just to get some lights into the grasses. So it's kind of like a reflection of the sun on the grass. And here I've added a bit of yellow ochre, and that's to put something on the horizon that is a bit like a cornfield or something. So I've mixed a little bit of that with a grey, so that it's not too rich and in your face. And I'm just really, really roughly painting that into the background. I'm not worrying too much about it at all at this stage. Lightening it up with a little bit of white and just giving a little bit of a horizon of something else going on rather than just the grass. So now I'm getting a pencil and I'm just drawing into the paint. The paint's wet, so you'll get different marks from all the tools I've used so far. and ones that you can't really see if you're a long way away, but if you go closer to the painting, you do see it. So the problem I've got at the minute is that it's like in two halves. You've got the sky and then you've got the foreground, which you quite often see, to be fair. But I want to add more interest and make the viewer's eye move around the painting. And I'm doing that by raising the levels of the grass on either side. And I'm also adding some very light colours to the grass. Just, as I said earlier, it's the sun reflecting off the grass. So you see those very bright, almost white reflections. And I want to introduce more dark tones into it. At the moment, if I reduce this to black and white, it might appear a little bit mid-tony. So I'm going to try and get some more blacks in. And the white's going to help, or the very light pale green. But the dark Prussian blue will really help. Now I'm using a different spatula. This is actually an art spatula. It's not as flexible, but it still has its uses. It's got quite straight, pointed edges, which are really useful to draw into wet paint. Obviously, you can only do it when it's wet, but I'm sort of moving it around in sort of circles, like kind of vegetation that you see in amongst grasses, and then just drawing up through the wet paint to make different very loose marks. So I'm kind of feeling it's working. There are no white spaces. Always a result. And I like the movement in the grass. I like the feeling of movement that you get. But I'm not happy about the sky. It's very dull. I mean, you do get sky like that. But I want to add a little bit of something into it. I mean, we often get little grey clouds and stuff. So I'm mixing up some grey and I'm adding a little bit of yellow ochre because I quite like that slightly warm grey that you sometimes get in clouds. I'm also going to add some more white. This is titanium white, which is the whitest of whites, if you like. And very, very loosely with a filbert brush, loading the brush up with paint and loosely painting over. And note how I turn the brush around. I don't keep it necessarily on the same plane all the time. So a bit of reflection now. I need to work out what to do next, and I think it's time to paint in the daisies. So I'm going to use white mixed with some grey and a little bit of the very pale green. So it's coming up as, that's the first layer, if you like, of paint of the daisy. And the first daisy I put in, obviously I do not put it in the centre of the canvas because that would look really wrong compositionally. So as you can see, I'm using the pointed edge of the spatula and very, very loosely, I mean so loosely, drawing these things in. If you look at the photograph, you can see there are, oh goodness, 30 petals around the daisy, but these ones are very, just much, much looser, and different sizes. Some are more obviously flower shaped than others. Ones in the distance are slightly smaller. Ones close to are obviously larger. Hopefully no two the same. Some of them are going to be above the line of the grass. And I'm sort of gently putting these, feeling my way across the canvas, if you like. Just trying not to be too detailed. Just trying to make them feel like they're daisies dancing across a field or, in a hedgerow. I'm using quite a lot of paint. And as you can see, I'm changing the way I use the spatula from the sort of thicker side to the more pointy side, just to get different marks, different feelings. and I'm kind of reasonably happy with the way that's looking. So I'm going to just do something which is great fun, and I do use this occasionally, and it's when you splatter paint, and of course you don't see, well, sometimes you see paint splattered, but in general in nature you don't see paint splattered. But what I feel it does is it gives you an energy, and it gives a sense of kind of excitement, and you could imagine that there were tiny daisies or tiny white flowers in amongst everything else. And I use a toothbrush, and I just have wettish white paint in this case, and I just splatter it over the painting. And now I'm going to add in the centres of the daisies. I'm going to use a bit of yellow ochre mixed with my cadmium yellow, just to darken it down a tiny bit. And again, small brush, and very, very quickly paint in those centres of those daisies. No detail, I'm not worried if they're round or whatever, I'm just painting them in so you get the sense of the flower. And then I'm sort of getting to the point where I'm wondering what it needs next. It's still very wet, and I feel I'm at a point now where I really should leave it. I've got a little bit of water there I'm dabbing off. I should leave it, let the paint dry, spend a bit of time away from it, and then come back to it and see what I need to do next. But I've just thought of something that works really well. It's a lovely little trick. I don't know if I can do it at the moment because of the time of year, but let me show you. I've collected these bits of vegetation from my garden. It's better if they're sort of fresh. Grass stems are really good, and you use them like a different mark making tool. This is a seed head, a very old dried up seed head, and you you run it through the paint really that's on your palette. I've put a little bit more Roamba out, and I'm wetting it just so that the paint adheres to it a bit better. As you can see, I'm really roughly running it through the paint. I've got a bit of the dark Roamba, I've got a bit of the blue, little bit more of that, and then what you do is you basically hit your painting very gently, and practice this beforehand on some paper, and it makes fantastic marks. They're different from anything else you've done. It's very different from using a brush and anything else really, and they work so well, and it's good fun. You get the sense of movement brilliantly from doing this. And honestly, you couldn't paint these marks with a brush. You just couldn't do it. And all of a sudden, it's transformed the painting. And what you can see here is there's a sense of movement around the painting because of the way that I've placed the marks, because of the way the grass goes up at the sides, and the way that the clouds are placed. There's this just sense of movement. Oops, put that straight. I'm going back in with a pencil just to make some smaller marks. But no, I'm going to use the very dry pieces of grass, as you can see here, and make some marks with that, and just basically do exactly the same thing, and then you'll get straighter lines, but I'm varying it across the painting so that again you're getting different marks, different colours because you're running it through your palette. That's always really successful. And look, experiment with all sorts of things. Experiment with different things in the garden, things in the kitchen, things in your garage. Honestly, the more that you experiment, the more fun you'll have. So now it's time to sort of take stock, see what needs to be done, see if there's anything that you can continue to do now. I always think it's wise when you're sort of struggling to stop and leave the painting for a while. I'm pretty pleased with how it's going so far. Is there anything else I can do? I'm going to add a different colour. I'm going to add some crimson. And I want to add crimson just to inject some more life into it with a different colour. So I'm using a clean brush, and this is a filbert, which is a round-ended flattish brush, and I'm just very, very loosely putting some tiny marks in, and I'm varying the angle of the brush so that it makes different marks. I'm varying the sizes. So imagine these as something like a campion, which is a sort of a pinkish flower. And by doing this, you're adding another layer of interest and more depth to the painting. So we're sort of building up the different marks, tonal values. This is quite a dark tonal value, and it also helps to lead the viewer's eye across the painting, because the same colour in different places means that the viewer tends to follow that colour. I'm lightening it a tiny bit with some white. I've got green in it, it's killed it slightly, so be careful of that. Try and keep your colours as clean as possible. So now, is this the moment when I should stop? I'm liking the way it looks at the moment. It's a little mark there, I need to... It's a bit too much paint. But I think I'm going to stop and cover up my palette with another palette. That keeps the paint dry, and wash the brushes and come back to it. So the paint's dry, but not on my palette because I've kept it wet with my fancy homemade palette. So now I'm going to go back in. I've taken a look at it. It needs more definition. It needs more differences in tonal value. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to paint the petals in with some nearly pure titanium white. They'll pop a bit more than they do at the moment. I'm using my my filbert, small filbert, but I'm not happy with it. So I'm going to swap to the spatula. It's much looser, it allows you to put it on lots of paint so you can get lots of texture, so the flowers do really stand out. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time going over the painting, painting over the flowers. This extra layer, at this point, the extra layers start to bring the whole thing to life. It's at this point in the painting when I always say to people, and I heard this from somebody else, it's not my quote, start like a builder and finish like a jeweller. So you start and you work really, really quickly because you can really do some extraordinary things that if you really thought about it, it becomes a bit laboured. And then once you've got that first sort of layer of paint, if you like, that first story of a painting, then you can look at it and see the things that are working and see the things that aren't working, and then develop it and change it. So now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to paint back in those the centres of the flowers because they sort of got a bit lost, and that brings the flowers to life. Again, fairly quickly, not spending a lot of time, just really loose marks. They don't have to be perfect. And again, spending a little bit of time just contemplating what needs to be done. My dog is getting bored. He is scratching himself. He wants his tea. This daisy's annoying me, so I've made that a little bit bigger. And then again, think through what needs to be done. I'm going to fill in a little bit of darker colours. I think the tonal values are not quite impactful enough, if you like. So I'm going to get some more of that Prussian blue mix and very roughly paint in. I mean, I'm using a small brush, small marks, I'm trying to keep this really loose. And yeah, just trying to feel, again, just feel my way across the painting. What's working, what isn't working. That's definitely brought the flowers out at the bottom a lot more. And that's what, working on the tonal differences in your painting does. It will make such a difference to your work. It will make it pop. It will make it a lot more exciting, visually more attractive. It stops people in their tracks. Going to bring out those red flowers again, and again really quickly, dotting across the painting, drawing the viewer's eye across, adding another layer, a depth, depth of interest to the painting. I'm feeling it's almost there, but let's think, what else could we do? Oh, yeah, there's always some mark that you don't want. Unfortunately, I saw it before it was too late. Just a splat of dark colour on that daisy, it just looked wrong. Just a couple more. These are just the tiniest differences that is just finishing off your painting. And it's certainly coming together. But I think there might be just a couple of things more I could do. I'm just going to put a little bit more detail into the clouds. It's really important that you don't overdo it and you don't ruin it at this stage. And it's easy to do. Knowing when to finish is important. And I'm using my fingers here to just loosen up those marks. And a little bit of yellow ochre in the clouds has sort of given them a peachy glow, which I quite like, but I need more white. And when you look at clouds, there's always a lot of colours in them, so it gives it a lot more depth. Now, one final thing I think I'm going to do. Oh no, hang on. I've got some green, a very light coloured green in the sky that I need to get rid of. Unfortunately, I've got a bit of the blue of the sky left, so I'm just going to paint that out with my finger. And then I'm just going to finish this off with some more splatting. And this could be, it could be buttercups glowing in the grass, or just the zing of spring. So I'm just getting some paint onto this toothbrush. It's quite wet. I just splashed it on the painting, and then just carefully, don't go crazy, not at this stage. Put some splats of paint over the painting, and it makes a difference. It's just another thing that just another layer of paint makes it look beautiful. And I think we're there. And here's the finished painting. From this photograph, which you can see similarities, but I've added my own touches to the final painting. It looks great when you crop it, so you can imagine it framed. And if you like this video, please do subscribe and hit the like button. Thanks for watching.